we can all agree that with the Nintendo Switch 2, there's been a lot of controversy over the physical game and the game keycard situation. Honestly, that might have just been fixed, because recently Spawnwave just made a deep dive on the cartridge itself. Because how this all started was a game named Mayo. Now, if you looked at Mayo at the store page, Mayo is about $20 digital, and it's about $30 physical. But where that doesn't make any sense is if you were to look at the actual Mayo game and the cartridge itself, because essentially you have to buy the 64GB cartridge for roughly $15. It could be more, it could be less, but it's about that. And then you would have to pay for packaging, you would have to pay for shipping, you would have to pay for all of these things. And if you wanted to get your money's worth out of the game, you would either be losing some or making very little to no money off of your game. So it seems like there might actually be a brand new cartridge for the Nintendo Switch 2. And if we look at this right here, there's essentially a lot of different codes that have been filed, and honestly, this potentially could lead into the idea of different size cartridges. Now, a little while ago, Nintendo there was a leak that was saying, oh, we're working on some bigger cartridges or different size cartridges, and now this might actually be a reality, because Mayo right here doesn't make the most sense when it comes to being on a 64GB cartridge, because if you weren't aware, 64GB is essentially the only cartridge that you can get for the Nintendo Switch 2 up to this point. The Nintendo Switch, however, does have different cartridge size, but right now this is something with the Switch 2 and it has to be like a speed cartridge. So overall, maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe it's just a Nintendo Switch 1 cartridge with Switch 2 sort of box. That definitely could be it, but I honestly think that it's much more, and it's definitely a really great thing to see, because with different cartridge size, this definitely means for more physical games. Instead of seeing those stupid digital games or the game key cards, you can finally see some more physical games, which is honestly really awesome. If you look at a game like Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, now that's a game that was actually on a physical cartridge for the Nintendo Switch 1. But then when you saw the Nintendo Switch 2 or the Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, that was not on a game cartridge, it was in fact on a game key card. So it's like, what went awry? It's probably the 64GB cartridge, because you're pretty much paying for more and you're getting less profit out of your game. So honestly, that just makes sense. Seeing this, you definitely could have seen more and more games start to utilize it. Now, I'm not saying that this will work for all the major AAA titles where the games are like 100GB, 80GB, whatever the case may be. Unless Nintendo makes a specific cartridge for like 124GB, which potentially this leak suggests that we might actually be seeing that. But for now, let's just assume that Nintendo is going to be working downwards to find more like smaller size cartridges, which would help a lot of indie games. And seeing as indie games are actually putting in the work to make physical games, because physical games are honestly awesome. They sell great, and it's just like, hey, you have that piece of history inside of your game collection, which overall is really awesome. I think collecting physical games is probably the best way to collect, but if you don't want to, you're pretty much getting a discount. So if you want your digital game, well then you're pretty much paying, like in the case of Mayo here, or even in the case of Hades 2. Hades 2 is another game that was using actually the 64GB cartridge, so you can buy digital for pretty much half the price. But if you wanted to, if you want the physical game, it's officially on the cartridge itself, you can pay more money and you can get yourself the physical game. But honestly, this would get rid of that. So instead of having double the price of the game, you would have maybe $10, just like Mayo would be $10 depending on what the cartridge is, of course. So if your game, for example, you're selling this game for maybe $60, okay? It's just a standard Nintendo game, and then maybe it's 100GB. Well, then you would have to buy the more expensive cartridge, which means that the physical game might be $20 more than the digital game. That definitely could be something that could happen. Like if you look at the case of Elden Ring. Elden Ring is about an 80GB game, so let's just say that Nintendo eventually rolls this out. Maybe instead of being on the game keycard, it's actually going to be on the physical cartridge itself. Honestly think that that would be the greatest thing, because right now that game is getting so much criticism about being on a game keycard. Actually owning your games is one of the best parts of being a gamer, because hey, you can say maybe 10 years down the road where the eShop is closed and all of these things don't work too well. Look at the 3DS, where you pretty much need physical games to play your games unless you do a little bit of tinkering with it. But honestly, the point is you can still take your 3DS games, slap it into the thing, and there you go, start playing. So with the physical game, you will be able to do that. So maybe they will change it over to a 24 gig cartridge. If you look at Cyberpunk 2077, that game is kind of crazy, and historically on how bad that launch actually was until they really shaped it up. They all changed it up. Now that game is pretty much a 10 out of 10. And also, the best part is they gave it an actual physical cartridge on the Nintendo Switch 2, which is really, really crazy. I don't believe it's necessarily on the actual disc for PlayStation or Xbox. I could be wrong, because I do believe you can still play the V1 version of that game. But hey, seeing it on the actual cartridge is really cool. Same thing goes with something like Pokemon Pocoia. That game was on a game keycard for some reason. It definitely would have made more sense to actually see it on the physical cartridge. Maybe it's because the game was only about 5 gigabytes, and what was the point of actually getting a 64 gigabyte cartridge for that small game, or it's because the speeds weren't there. But for Pokemon Pocoia game, you don't necessarily need the fastest speeds and the best of the best hardware for a Pokemon game. So maybe I could be taking this completely wrong. But overall, this is definitely really great. This is a great sign, a great news for you game collectors out there, because honestly, I am really excited to see more and more actual games, like physical games, because right now there's a lot of games that I would love to pick up, but at the same time, I guess you're kind of owning your game, but you're not really owning the game, because let's just say that you get banned. I mean, I guess it's not a digital game because you technically would get that erased, but you still could use the cartridge. Overall, it's a whole wonky mess. I guess it's still better than digital games in my opinion, but having an actual physical would be great, because let's just say that you don't have any internet. You're living in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and somehow you ended up with a game. I have no idea how you got that game, but you got the game, point being cleared, and then all of a sudden you can put it in the Switch, and there you go. Without any internet, you can't do that. You just can't do that. It doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense to even have that anyways. But anyways, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that this is a great thing? Because me, I think that this is fantastic. This is amazing. I've always wanted to see more and more physical games get launched, and this is why I oftentimes go back to the Nintendo Switch 1 to get my games. Like recently, I've been looking at Puyo Puyo Tetris, and I really want to see that game. And you see, the Nintendo Switch 2 version is in fact a $50 game. But then when you look at it, the Nintendo Switch 1 on the physical cartridge is $80. So obviously physical games are something truly special. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Hope that you enjoyed. Consider to hit the like button, maybe subscribing if you're new. We do a bunch of different Nintendo content. Let me know if you like this sort of format better. Do you like having my face inside the videos? Do you want it more like a different mixed situation, or kind of like this is pretty interesting? Anyways, let me know. Let me know if the thumbnail was too egregious, and thank you so much. See you in the next one.